Haki is trash, or is it? When it comes to popular power systems in battle shonen anime, Haki is probably one of the more divisive power systems. You have people who love Haki as a concept, and you have people who hate it and feel they actually ruined the fight in One Piece. So after going through how Haki has been introduced and how it has impacted the One Piece series, I'm going to try and answer the question, is Haki a good power system? So before we get straight into Haki, we first have to look at One Piece before Haki was introduced. During the pre-timeskip era of One Piece, the main power system was Devil Fruits. With Devil Fruits, they are some of the most creative power systems out there. Every Devil Fruit has a unique ability depending on the type of fruit that the person consumes. From turning your snot into bombs, to being able to transform into a leopard. The possibilities are endless with Devil Fruits. And because of this, the fights were really creative, because you had to think of ways to counter those Devil Fruit abilities. For example, when you look at the fight between Luffy and Crocodile in Alabasta, because physical attacks didn't work in Crocodile at the time, the only way to damage him was to use water. And even after Luffy ran out of water during this fight, he instead used the water in his blood as a way to deal damage to Crocodile, which ended up defeating him. It was a genius and creative way of beating Crocodile, despite him having the stronger Devil Fruit. Even characters like Usopp and Nami, who were part of the weakest trio, always found smart ways to beat their opponents who were Devil Fruit users, despite not being one themselves. So back then, because of Devil Fruit, the fights were always something new and sometimes could even get wacky at times, which is fitting for a series like One Piece. However, there were two issues with Devil Fruits as a power system during that point. The first issue was that the ability that you get from a Devil Fruit relies solely on luck, because it's been stated that you can only tell what Devil Fruit you have once you eat it. Or you can check in Devil Fruit encyclopedias about certain Devil Fruits, but for the most part, most characters have their abilities because of luck. You can be lucky and have a really strong Devil Fruit, like a mythical Zoan type fruit, or you can be very unlucky and have a Devil Fruit that is not very useful in battle, and this can cause an imbalance in the matchups. And the second issue that was starting to occur was the low gear Devil Fruit category. Back in the pre-timeskip, low gear Devil Fruits were the most overpowered out of the three categories of Devil Fruits. Low gears turn your body into a natural element, meaning that they were invulnerable to any physical attacks, and even if you did manage to attack them by cutting off their limbs or shooting bullets through them, they wouldn't feel the pain and they would just regenerate any lost limbs. This made them almost impossible to defeat, and even though there were some ways to counter some low gear Devil Fruit users, most of them were never shown to have any counters. Even if you looked at NL, the only reason Luffy beat him was because he was the only character who had a rubber body. Nobody else had any access to rubber, so there was no way to beat him during the early portion of the story. And this made the power system quite imbalanced, because the abilities that you get relies on luck. They don't require any hard work or any training to attain them, and the low gear users were practically unstoppable. And I think this issue started to become a lot more prevalent with the introduction of the Admirals. I think what made the three Admirals so scary and so threatening was because they were all low gear Devil Fruit users, and no matter what type of attacks we saw people try on them, they never had any effect on them. So by the end of that pre-timeskip, it got to the point where having a stronger Devil Fruit would guarantee you the win. And this is where Haki comes in. Haki originally came in to fix the core issues of the Devil Fruit power system. Unlike Devil Fruit, Haki is something that can be learned by anyone. With enough training and hard work, any character in the series can become very skilled at Haki, and you even have characters like Shanks and Garp, who aren't Devil Fruit users, pull off some amazing things with Haki. It gives people who might not have the strongest Devil Fruit a fighting chance in the world of pirates, instead of having to rely on if you're lucky enough to get an overpowered Devil Fruit. And Haki also fixed its second issue with the low gear users, by making it so that using your armament Haki can be used to deal actual damage to the low gear users. This was made to balance out the power system better, so that low gear wasn't as invulnerable as it used to be, since now anyone can have a fighting chance against them, and that was thanks to Haki. And just Haki as an initial concept was brilliant, because it represents your willpower, and you have to go through hard work and discipline in order to unlock it. It's always more satisfying to unlock something through your own hard work, rather than getting an ability you feel you didn't earn or were lucky enough to attain. It was the perfect solution to the core issue of Devil Fruit that was becoming prevalent as the series went on. But did Haki really solve the issues for the long term? Going into the post-timeskip, Haki became a lot more prevalent to where all the biggest fights had Haki as a major factor in those fights, which differed from the early One Piece fight when it was mostly two Devil Fruit users against each other. And this started to become a problem later on, because Haki started out as a way to balance the power system, but it ended up becoming an example of power escalation. Nowadays, with One Piece fight, the winner is now determined by who has the stronger Haki now. They set more as power levels, and if you had the stronger Haki, you were almost guaranteed to beat your opponent. And this took away the strategy and the creativity that the early One Piece fights used to have, which is the direct opposite of what Haki was intended to do. Because even though Haki was made so that any character can now damage low gear Devil Fruit users, this eliminated the ways in how characters used to try and counter the low gear Devil Fruit. Let's go back to the Luffy vs Crocodile example again. What made Luffy defeating Crocodile so good back then was the fact that Luffy had to use water in his blood as a way to defeat Crocodile, because he no longer had any access to water. It built up tension during the fight, because you're left wondering how Luffy is going to beat him. So then he uses his blood as a way to adapt, which was a smart idea. But then if you take the same fight again, but this time Luffy has Haki, then all Luffy has to do is just keep punching him, because now he can just touch him with Haki. There would be no strategy or ways of outthinking the opponent, because Haki is just going to solve everything. And that takes away the creativity and just dumbs down the fight as a result. And this was shown with Luffy when he thought he's a clown in Punk Hazard. Caesar Clown is a gas Logia Devil Fruit user, but Luffy just defeats him with a Gum Gum Greasy Magnum coated with Haki. He doesn't think of any way to counter his gas abilities or anything, because all he needed was Haki. And a similar thing happened with Zoro when he fought against Monet, who was a Snow Logia Devil Fruit user, because Zoro could have just killed her with Haki if he wanted to, and that would have been it, and that was what caused Monet to be paralyzed in fear. He didn't have to strategize or do anything of the sort. All he had to do was just show how strong his Haki was, and that was it. When Luffy fought against Kaido in Wano, he lost to him initially, and he had to think of a way to beat him, and the conclusion he came to was just to advance his Haki even further, instead of thinking how he can outsmart him or counter his Devil Fruit. And another problem with this was the fact that even though every character can learn Haki through willpower and doing the right training, this only applied to observation and armament Haki. Conqueror's Haki cannot be achieved through hard work. It is something that is extremely rare, and only a select few are born with this ability. So this already limits the amount of characters who can truly become top tier in the series, because you have to be lucky enough to be born with Conqueror's Haki. And in Wano, we learned that you can also coach your arms and weapons with Conqueror's Haki, which was originally the whole purpose of armament Haki. And infusing your Conqueror's Haki is shown to be a lot more effective against your opponent than just using armament Haki, as shown when Luffy managed to damage Kaido. So now it just made armament Haki less significant because of this. And Conqueror's Haki is also shown to be the only way to counter the immortality of the Holy Knights from the world government, as shown on Elbaf. So it causes an imbalance once more, since only those with Conqueror's Haki are able to become amongst the top tiers in the verse. This again had the opposite effect of what Haki was intended to do for the series. One of the issues with Devil Fruit was that acquiring a strong Devil Fruit solely depends on luck, and it's not something everyone can just unlock. But now Conqueror's Haki is now the same issue that Devil Fruits had in the first place, so it became the very same problem that it was originally made to fix. It went from fights being based on creativity and strategy to being just based on raw power. And it was this shift in the fights in One Piece where people started to become bothered by the way Haki was handled. When Haki was first introduced, it was shown as some invisible energy with a lot of mystery behind it, but now it has become so much more prevalent, it's now visible and is similar to aura. In the anime version, you have Haki being shown with different colours and aura being used to cover the characters, like you're watching a Dragon Ball Z fight, even though the fights in One Piece never used to be like this, so it seems as if Haki was slowly taking away the identity of what One Piece fights used to be, at least in the anime version. So after going through how Haki was introduced, and the impact it has had on the current power system of One Piece, is Haki a good power system? Well, if you look at it in the beginning for the short term, when it did initially solve the core issues of Devil Fruit, then yes, you could say it is a good power system. But in the long term, because it ended up becoming problematic and flattened the creativity of the fight in One Piece, then I wouldn't consider it a good power system in the long run. I think it all depends on how you look at it from different points of the story. Haki was a brilliant idea, but the execution is where we see the problems. It was originally created to balance out the power system, but then it just got to the point where it became a deciding factor in winning the fights. But what do you guys think? Do you think Haki is a good power system, or do you think it's a bad one? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.